Welcome to the ModernizeOrdie Podcast, CFML News Edition, where we keep you up to date with everything going on in the Cold Fusion community. We'll share the latest news on events, releases to engines, frameworks, libraries, and tools, as well as spotlighting quality content from the community.
Hello and welcome to the Modernize or Die podcast, CFML News Edition. It is February 1st, 2022. This is episode 133. I am Eric Peterson, and today I am joined by Mr. Brad Wood. How you doing, Brad?
Yeah, I'm doing great. It feels like just the other day it was episode 100. I can't believe it's 133 already. That's awesome.
Yes, it is. Once a week, every week. That's not true. Sometimes we take breaks.
Well, we should just do it twice a week, every once in a while, and then it'll kind of average out.
There you go. As a news podcast, it feels hard for us to prep in advance, Like if we did 2 in 1 week, it just wouldn't really fly. But anyway, we want to take a minute to thank our sponsor, Ortus Solutions, the makers of all your favorite boxes. There's a few ways you can say thank you: liking and subscribing these videos on YouTube, or subscribing in your favorite podcast app of choice. And by heading over to CFCasts, signing up for an account there. It releases new CFML training content every week. Or by buying Ortus's book, 102 CommandBox Quick Tips and Tricks, until the CommandBox book comes out, which I think we're up to 105 tips now. We're adding one every week, right? Until Brad writes it. Right, Brad? Right?
My evil plan is to have everyone else write it for me, so it's all going according to plan so far.
If by going to plan means nothing's changed, then yes, it is going to plan. And then finally, you can support us on Patreon. We love our Patreon supporters. We have 96% of this podcast supported from our Patreon supporters, and we'll tell you more about that at the end of the episode. But let's jump into some news for today.
News, yay.
The first one up is the State of the Cold Fusion Union survey has been released for 2022. This is something that we harp on every year when it comes out. It helps us know where the community's at and what we need to support, especially engine-wise, and where we can focus more of our attention if there's a gap that needs to be filled, or training that we can address some different areas. So we please encourage you to go and fill out this survey so we can get that information.
It's only 50 questions. Takes like 5 minutes. We did add a couple questions this year, and we removed a couple. We swapped a couple around. We modified a few of the options based on what the trends were in the last survey. But it's pretty much the same questions every year. That way we can kind of see the trends on it. So, also, after you're done taking it, since you're one of the lucky few Cold Fusion people who pays attention to Cold Fusion social media, send it to everyone you know who also does Cold Fusion, who probably doesn't listen to podcasts or doesn't watch the Cold Fusion hashtag on Twitter or whatever, because we want to get as many people as possible. Normally we get around 500 people. Last year the number of respondents was a little low, so hoping to get the numbers back up. And we got some direct input from Adobe as well. The new product manager had some suggestions, because Adobe does look at the answers to this, and they also read all of the comments, including the ones that are not always so nice to Adobe. So do know that your valuable feedback is used by not only Ortus and the greater Cold Fusion community, but even the Adobe Cold Fusion team as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Next up, in case you missed it, last Friday was an Ortus webinar, the first of the year. It was on CF Wire with Grant Copley.
CB Wire, right?
CB Wire. Thank you. Yes. So this is about building modern reactive CFML apps using very little JavaScript. You can check that out now over on CFCasts. And I was just editing a little thing on the slug, because the slug ended in .js, which, as you can imagine, kind of had some issues.
Yeah, I'm gonna say, CommandBox's routing, I believe, has some built-in conventions when your routes end in an extension, don't they?
They do, and it was not what we wanted, so now it is fixed.
Nice.
Though, fun fact, this being CFCasts is an inertia app, and if you navigated there just via the the UI, it handled it fine and updated the URL fine. It was just when you tried to link there. So, fun times. Okay, coming up here at the end of the month is, I believe, the inaugural meeting of the Hawaii Cold Fusion user group. So this was announced last week that it was coming back, or starting, or one of the three. This is going to be using CFCs in your Cold Fusion applications, hosted by John Barrett. Friday, February 25th, 5 p.m. Central Time, which I think is 1 p.m. Hawaii time. So, Meetup.com was nice enough to translate it into my
Nice.
time zone. So,
Nice. I know that John Barrett's working on a website for his new user group, and he
yeah.
was asking me questions about CommandBox yesterday. So hopefully we can help him get that figured out. It'd be great to see his new site on CommandBox if possible.
So there is a site up, and I'll put it in the chat. It's cfhawaii.net. It just is kind of a placeholder, though. I visited it and then started to click around trying to see what I was missing, and then realized that it's just a placeholder.
It just says Hawaii Cold Fusion User Group.
So, but we're excited for their meetup. Again, anybody can join online, February 25th, 2022, at 5 p.m. Central Time. Brad, you were on a podcast that was released this last week. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I hung out on the CFAlive podcast, and our topic of the day was CommandBox Workflow Magic. Basically, just talking about development workflows and how CommandBox helps improve those. And we just kind of went through my list of favorite CommandBox modules, which included several of yours, Eric. Like .env, and we talked about ngrok, and I forget which ones. I had a whole list of them. We only made it through like half of them. We had to start with the most important ones. But we just talked about ways that you can have a better workflow and get more done as a Cold Fusion developer using CommandBox and all the modules out there, including the ones I didn't write, which are fantastic. So you can check that out over on the terratech.com podcast page. It was about an hour-long chat that we had.
Awesome. I noticed that the top module mentioned in this episode, is the most important one. It is CommandBox Bullet Train, which makes CommandBox look freaking cool. So, I mean, useful too, but let's be honest, it makes it look cool.
Yep, cool times. Yeah, I was just working with Scott Steinbeck this week, seeing about doing some improvements to how it lists servers in Bullet Train, and we were trying to figure out if you have more than one server in the same directory, how could we, maybe merge that information or, favor the running server. And I was worried about the performance of, checking if the servers are online, because CommandBox actually has to check and see if the port is bound to see if the server's running. And so what came out of that is I got a nice little pull request yesterday from Scott, switching is the server running check over to using the PID file, which is created when the server started and deleted when the server stops, which is actually a pretty cool implementation. And it's sped up how long it takes to check if the server's running.
Nice. Good things coming out from that. Well, go ahead and go take a listen to that episode in your podcast player of choice. That's CommandBox Workflow Magic on the CFAlive podcast. Next, we've mentioned a few times the Adobe workshops led by Damien Bruendonks. The first one is tomorrow, 9 to 4:30 Central European Time, and then another one on March 9th, same times. You can register at Adobe's website, and we'll put the link in the show notes.
So what are these workshops about?
It is just titled Adobe Cold Fusion Workshop to learn how you and your agency can leverage Cold Fusion to create amazing web content.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm reading the little thing they have. Major features, how to use CFML, how to reuse code. It almost seems kind of like an intro on convincing someone to use Cold Fusion, though it's a little vague, but they have a lot of things in the bullet points. Interesting. All right, well, it's free, so there you go.
Okay, let's talk about CFCasts update. We actually mentioned it earlier, but this week we released the CBWire and Alpine JS webinar with Grant Copley. You can view that right now in our new Ortus Webinars 2022 series, which is free for everybody. So go ahead and go check that one out.
The CFCast link appears to have the same .js issue that the
just
the
in our
Ortus
docs
blog did.
We'll get that fixed in the show notes.
Oh, conventions are great until they bite you in the butt.
Well, let's talk about some upcoming conferences.
Mm-hmm.
And ones that you might have just missed. The Vue.js Nation conference was this last week. You can still go to the website, though, and register and watch the on-demand videos if Vue is your cup of tea.
And those videos are free?
Yes.
Is that what I understand? Wow, That's pretty cool.
The biggest things from there is Vue 3 is becoming the default. They have their new doc site. Everything's finally migrating after, a year and a half of talking about Vue 3. So as soon as that finishes, I'll actually kind of look into that.
I was going to say, what version of Vue are we using on all of our projects?
Almost everything's Vue 2 for us. So, and the good news is you can pretty much use the same thing, but wasn't even interested in looking until it was the official new version.
Right on. So there was also DevNexus, which was online for, I think, 2 years. They're finally back to in-person. So this is a big Java-ish conference in Atlanta, Georgia. I need to check and see if the Fusion Reactor guys are going to come back out and sponsor. They've usually sponsored. Adobe has sponsored there before. But Luis and I both got talks accepted this year, which is exciting. So it is nearly impossible to get them to accept a talk that even mentions Cold Fusion, because they don't care, unless you're any other JVM language in the world, in which case, yes, please talk. But Cold Fusion, they don't ever want us to talk about that. So they accepted Luis's Alpine JS talk, declaring React with simplicity, and they accepted a rather old talk of mine, what's a pull request, how to contribute to open source. So I will gladly try to work some Cold Fusion examples into my pull request talk. But that's pretty exciting. That's a pretty big conference. I don't know if the numbers will be down, but they normally have about 2,000 people and so much swag, so much just beautiful free stuff at that conference. Also, Balbino, one of our Java developers from El Salvador, who helps me work on CommandBox, is planning on attending with Luis and I. So anyway, if you're looking to learn some fun stuff about just the Java ecosystem, it's always a fun one to go to in person. And Luis and I always just kind of keep tabs on it, because the Java ecosystem is the ecosystem that we kind of work and live in. So there's a lot of relevant stuff. And it's not strictly a Java conference. They have a lot of workflow, tooling, talks. The sponsors are all like Oracle, Heroku, Microsoft, Red Hat. There's a lot of really good general stuff about Docker, Kubernetes. So anyway, I'm excited about DevNexus. That's April 12th to the 14th. So I don't know how many months. Oh, what was that? 2 months, 2.5 months.
Awesome. I feel like, based on what you just said, you need to work in a meme about we don't talk about Cold Fusion, based on in content.
About CFML, no,
right?
No. Oh my gosh, my kids had that song memorized. We had the piano music downloaded for them to learn. It plays on repeat.
You and the rest of the world, I believe that's the top Hot 100 on Billboard. So
my oldest is just anything Lin-Manuel Miranda. She loves, and so he has so much good stuff. But anyway, back to Cold Fusion. Yeah, I'll work on that. We don't talk about CFML meme. I got to rhyme with it. Word says that Lin-Manuel actually changed Bruno's name to work with that song. I forget what it was originally going to be. My daughter could probably tell me. But yeah, I changed it to Bruno, so it would rhyme with no, which works both in English and Spanish. Just genius. Anyway.
The the last conference we want to talk about is a bit of a teaser. Into the Box 2022. We are looking tentatively at the end of September. So keep that area around open so you can join us at Into the Box 2022.
Isn't that where we were last year?
Believe so, but we've also had it in May. So
well, yes, normally been in May, and we had pushed it back, hoping for travel restrictions to be lifted. Right. Well, I mean, that's what? How many months do we have? 8 months until then. Good gosh, I hope that people are able to. I mean, we had it live last year. I thought it was a great success, but we really had limited numbers, and a lot of that was because people literally weren't able to travel to the country, and so what are you going to do?
Yeah.
But we did a really good job, I think, of having the online in person kind of married together, so we could have an equal experience that wasn't an afterthought. So if nothing else, I'm sure we'll do that again. We'll probably do that anyway, regardless. But that's exciting. Maybe the hotel will have their sound system fixed.
Maybe we'll fix it for him again.
I got to completely rewire the hotel's sound system the night before our conference last year because we arrived and they were like, "Oh yeah, a lightning storm took that out a few months ago. We haven't had it fixed yet." And we're like, "What?" we needed that.
We paid you for this. All right. Well, that is our news on conferences. So let's move into blogs, tweets, and videos of the week. The first ones are a couple tweets. One by you, Brad. Tell me about what's happening to forwarded headers, or specifically the X forwarded for header in the next version of CommandBox.
Yeah, I put out a tweet this morning, people. I don't like to have any compatibility changes in minor releases of CommandBox, but a security guy had pointed out to me a little loophole in the way CommandBox obeys X forwarded for headers. And I thought, well, gosh darn it. My rule is CommandBox needs to be secure by default. So out of the box, you type server start. It needs to be a production ready server unless you say profile is development or don't block the web admin. You have to peel off the security stuff, which is kind of, when CommandBox first came out, it was kind of like, hey, development server, everything is open up, who cares? Right. And, as people started using it in production, it moved the other direction. So the problem is the standard for web proxies are when the request bounces through a proxy and then gets sent off to the, the upstream server. The proxy will add a header called X forwarded for, which is the IP address of the origin, the client, the person's browser, right? And so your remote server sees the IP address of the proxy. And if you want to see what the original IP address was, you look at that X forwarded for header and you're like, oh, it was forwarded on behalf of this guy. And if it bounces through multiple proxies, you get a common limited list. Great stuff. The problem is CommandBox's default lockdown rules use some IP-based restrictions. So if you tell CommandBox to block the Cold Fusion administrator for external users, anybody coming from localhost, 127001 is like, oh, here you go, right on in. Here's the administrator. And you can also do your own IP-based lockdowns. It's a general purpose feature of the Undertow server rules. But CommandBox is always sort of blindly accepting that header. The problem is if your CommandBox instance is not behind an upstream proxy, which always sets that header, then a malicious user, they could just add their own fake header that says, yeah, I was forwarded for localhost. Sure, why not? Right. And if you just blindly use the header, that could be used to get around IP-based restrictions. So I went ahead and I changed that setting to be off by default. So if you're using CommandBox in production behind the proxy and you want the IP address, which trickles down to the CGI scope, and Lucy, you want that to be the real quote unquote IP, you'll just need to toggle a flag on in your server.json. But it was important that I couldn't just trust that by default. And so that's why I needed to turn that setting off. So basically the rule is if you're behind a proxy that you trust, that always sets that header, you can turn that flag on. Don't need to worry about it. But if you just have CommandBox sitting out on the internet, not behind any proxies at all, you really can't trust whatever value may or may not be on that header. Which if you're not doing any IP-based lockdowns, who cares? I mean, it doesn't matter. But if you are trusting that IP address to be something that, isn't spoofed, that depends on your setup. And CommandBox can't detect that itself. So I'm just making you tell me now, can I trust the forwarded by header? Because if not, I'm not going to trust it anymore. But that'll be in CommandBox 5.5, which will release hopefully as soon as Lucy 5.3.9 releases, which will be the abolish Log4j 1.0 release.
That's right. Good segue. Lucy 539 snapshots keep coming out, and they are getting rid of any Log4j1 references and initial M1 support. So for all
and
of
this, yeah, this is like the most common support thing that I answer right now with CommandBox users on Macs is people have an M1, they install it with Homebrew, which is super easy, brew install CommandBox, and it doesn't work. And the problem is Lucy's using an older version of a JNA OSGI bundle, which is somehow incompatible with the newer versions of Java. It's weird and lame, but it makes CommandBox blow up, and people are like, "Why doesn't it work?" So after bouncing around the backlog for a while, Zach finally kicked that ticket's butt. And so people will have native M1 support, and that will be coming out at the same time as this Let's Get Rid of Log4j1. Because when the Log4Shell exploit came out, Lucy was like, well, we don't use Log4j2. We're good. We still use that really old Log4j1, right? Which has some critical vulnerabilities, which are not exploitable in the default configuration of Lucy. But with all of the gun shyness that came out of, the Log4j and the oh crap, we're all going to die, security teams anywhere just started flagging even Log4j1 of any version as just a critical vulnerability. They don't care if you're vulnerable in the default configuration or not. They want Log4j1 gone. In fact, they want everything south of Log4j 2.17 gone. And of course, that's the problem because both Adobe and Lucy and CommandBox all had these older versions of Log4j1, which weren't vulnerable in their default configuration, but it doesn't matter because we've got government clients threatening to pull the cords out of the walls if we don't get rid of those Log4j1 jars like ASAP. So we've been scrambling to do that. It was only about a day's worth of work to get Log4j updated in CommandBox. Lucy had quite a few more touch points. Several of the extensions were all using it. But Lucy 5.3.9 is just like this far away from finally getting the last use of Log4j1. It's the Access extension. Once that is done, then I've switched CommandBox over to use the snapshots of Lucy, so people can test it or even use it if they need to. Because I know some people are really under the gun with their InfoSec departments. They've got a not so polite deadline headed their way. So as soon as Lucy 5.3.9 comes out, which has like a huge list of query pull requests that I sent, all sorts of fixes there. There's actually going to be quite a bit in the 5.3.9 release. There's quite a few things that have gotten in there. But once 5.3.9 is out, which, and I see Zach saying right now that he just fixed Access. That's awesome. Well, I'll probably bump it after this, after the podcast. And once that releases, and I know they're going to do a release candidate for Lucy 5.3.9. Once that goes gold, I'll cut CommandBox 5.5, which also has gotten rid of its Log4j daemons. And then anybody doing, production server deployments can have a fully Log4j1 free deployment, unless you're deploying Adobe Fusion, in which case there's still some Log4j1 jars. Adobe has said that their next update will remove those. They've mitigated them by removing some class files, but again, the government InfoSec teams that we're working with don't give a flying crap what's been done to them. They want the jars gone, like GONE gone. Anyway, so there is no ETA on Adobe's release, but I do know that Lucy and CommandBox are rounding the corner to be able to have a release out there that has no Log4j1, which is very important to the people that need it. I get questions almost every day. It's like, when are you gonna have a version of CommandBox that doesn't have Log4j1 anymore? And I'm like, it's coming. So anyway, crazy times.
This talk about the audit and like all of the flags being thrown by these security audits and nobody quite thinking it through. Remind me of an article. I'll put it in the show notes, but it was about. It was by Dan Abramov, who works on the React team at Facebook, and he was talking about NPM audit and just how it just creates nightmares of maintenance that doesn't need to happen. And he would talk about features like this command line tool was flagged as like being vulnerable to an attack that would only work if you were running this on a web server, but yet it's still flagged and people are opening issues on the repo, and it just reminds me of that. We hopefully we can get a little bit more sane around those instead of just big, denied
Yeah.
stamps
I mean,
on everything.
it's difficult because infosec teams always trend to the safer side, right? If it's like, well, this might be safe, but we're not 1000% sure, that we're like, get rid of it. We don't care. But what you typically have are, the teams of people oftentimes making rules, about, we're not allowed to have this jar anywhere on our hard drives, and we have scanners stuff to search for it. They typically don't necessarily know the programming language or understand the ins and outs. All they know is that they've seen the 37 ZDNet articles about everyone and their dog getting hacked, and they're like, oh my gosh, we need to get rid of this. And oftentimes in the larger corporations and governments, there's not a lot of space for, well, hold on, you're right, this is dangerous, but it's a development tool and we're using it in a certain context, and they're like, we don't care, get rid of it. And it is tricky to have those conversations, and I understand being safe by default, but it's frustrating sometimes when you feel like there should be more to the conversation. It's not always black and white, but at the end of the day, I mean, at least with Log4j, it's not a bad thing. It's a little annoying that out of all the features that could have been added to Lucy, right? A bunch of development time was all poured into updated library that was like technically working fine. I mean, the good thing is, hey, Lucy is on in CommandBox. It's on a recent version of Log4j. Yay, technical debt erased. But it's still like man, how many of my tickets in the backlog could have been fixed with all the hours that Misha and Zach spent chasing down Log4j? What are you gonna do, right? Yeah. But yeah, well, I mean, and the other kind of irony thing is, Log4j was sort of that big flash in the pan. Not to imply it wasn't an important flash, but the Eye of Sauron focuses on Log4j, and everyone's just looking at it. And the irony is, there's probably 15 other little silly libraries just like Log4j that are equally as out of date everywhere on the internet, but nobody cares because it wasn't the big front headline for a full month. And it almost feels a little lopsided as far as everyone's like, oh my gosh, we're getting Log4j, but is anybody else actually going through the rest of the dependency list? I'm sure some people are, but how many people actually just all right, let's go through everything we have and let's make sure none of them are really old? Or how many people were just okay, well, Log4j check, move on, and then they left all the old stuff laying around. Because it really should be a regular thing you do where you're looking at all your dependencies. But oftentimes people just need to check the box, which is also,
right. It comes from having security be, there's not a person focused on security. It needs to be automated because we're not going to, we need it to be fast. We need it to be cheap. And so now you just get, giant deny lists of don't use these things.
Yeah. And Adam Cameron just brought up a little point in the chat, which is oftentimes ultimately the companies don't trust the developers to make the right decision. And I've seen that as well. I mean, if the developers stayed on top of things and never left the old versions and were honest with the risk, they wouldn't need the InfoSec team breathing down their neck. But we all know the developer's going to be lazy and they're going to leave that old version for 20 years until somebody makes them update it, which is kind of why you end up with the, Thor hammer security teams that, the executives say, you've got to beat it into them, otherwise they'll never do it. So yeah, it's an interesting scenario, but anyway,
this nightmare is almost over. Ready for the next one.
Yeah, there's going to be another variant, another Log4j variant. You wait.
To come back to the M1 support, I think my favorite thing, there's supposed to be there will be a performance improvement technically, but I think the thing I'm most excited for is it is very difficult right now to teach somebody to download and install an Intel version of Java on an M1 Mac. And you try to tell them that, you're they just look at you like, I don't get it. I did brew install CommandBox. You're like, ah. So
Well, yeah, that's what's frustrating is it should be easy. It should just be brew install CommandBox done, and then it's like, oh well, it doesn't actually work. You got to do all, and then all of a sudden the convenience of homebrew is like out the window. But anyway,
Yeah.
so many things out of my control, unfortunately. But
Yeah. Glad it's almost solved. All right, let's move on to the Ben corner of the show. We have 3 blog posts from Ben, and we'll start with one about saying, I always design the database schema first, then the cold fusion code. So this is in response to the idea that you should be designing domain objects first and kind of mapping that to a database at the end.
no, I didn't read the whole article. I laughed when I saw it just because when ORMs really gained in popularity, this was a huge talking point. Which, if you're designing a database first, you're doing it wrong. You design the models first, and then the database just follows them. Of course, if people don't really subscribe to the ORM, they probably don't care as much about that. I don't think I ever wound up in either camp, though. I think I was probably a little bit in the middle. Being a DBA for so many years, I can't not think about the database. When I think of a design of an application, I'm already thinking how the joins are going to work and where the foreign keys will be. So it's really hard for me to not think about the databases. So I probably sympathize quite a bit with Ben, even though I do think it's important to have a solid, domain model that makes sense on its own. But yeah, he has quite a lengthy post on this.
Yeah, a lot goes into his architecture choices for his app. One thing I really agreed with and taking away from this is if you're using a relational database, lean into what it's good at. So often I see people doing all of the validation checks purely in code, and then there's no unique constraints on the table, or learning how indexes can improve the queries that you're running. You got to lean into that tool because it is powerful.
I think you get more vendor lock-in. The more you do it, the more you rely on, and of course, just data types are a simple thing. Some people that really lean into a lot of SQL Server specific things, maybe their app can't run on MySQL, which may or not be a big deal. But I do understand what you're saying though, because I've talked with people that had this very kind of black and white. Your database does one thing, it just selects, inserts, updates, deletes. No business logic, nothing. Everything else has to be in the app. And sometimes, like you said, I think you run a little foul of missing some of the really clean and performant ways you could have push some aspects of that into the database where it makes sense, even though I'm very conscious to not end up with a bunch of business logic hiding down in my database. But there are a lot of things that database engines are good at. So it's one of those things where the answer is probably somewhere in the middle, and I've kind of swung around on both extremes over the years as a developer, when I'm like, I finally have arrived. Everything should be in the database, or everything should be in the app code, and then eventually you kind of wind up somewhere you're like, oh well, actually. But it's a great conversation to be had. And the places where I work, a lot of times it seems to depend on if you have a dedicated database team, with DBAs that are all wanting to do stuff in the database, or if it's just Cold Fusion guys doing the database work themselves. Yeah. It seems to wind up with different approaches.
Yeah, I think I would say for most apps, you don't need to be looking into so much stored procedures as you need to be looking into explain plans and indexes. Those two things will speed up so much of your code. So if you're looking for that low hanging fruit, that's where I would focus my database learning on. So
absolutely, yeah. If there's a query that's slow, you need to be able to know how to find out what it's doing and why it's slow. Or it's turned into a black box. It's like a mechanic, you wanted to fix the car without opening the hood. And of course, I'm most comfortable with SQL Server, but almost every database has some kind of explain plan equivalent.
Yep.
I totally agree with you. That's one of the most valuable bits of learning you can do for yourself, is being able to tune queries.
All right, the next one in the Ben corner is turning off the script protect feature safely in Cold Fusion 2021. So I'll be honest, I didn't know script protect was a thing.
Really?
No, I just
Oh my god.
I'm used to doing just kind of like Ben goes in this post. I'm used to doing the encoding and the anti-SAMI kind of stuff myself. So I've never really thought about what Cold Fusion was doing. If you were like me, this feature will scan the input scopes, form URL, I believe
Mm-mm.
cookie, and if it found script tags, it would replace the first one with invalid
Valid
tag.
tag.
So then incoming code would have invalid tag. It would never have script. It would never get injected into wherever you might be displaying that. So that ended up being a problem because of how he was using
Well, it's
a
always a
JavaScript
problem.
library.
I've had to turn off script protect on most of the sites that I have, and probably because most of my websites are content box based CMSs, and without fail, I'm editing something and I want to have a little JavaScript, you know, tag in the code that I'm writing in the little WYSIWYG editor, and you hit save and you end up with freaking invalid tag in the database. I know people say security is best in layers. I have always kind of hated script protect, and I think the reason is because it's really more of a heuristic space check that guesses what you want it to do, and it. I don't like it because I think people use it in place of what you said, proper encoding of untrusted output based on where they're outputting it, right? So output in HTML or encoding, right? Encoding for HTML, encode for JavaScript, encode for attribute, all that stuff. Script protect is sort of like a little, kind of like band-aid you slap on that says, yeah, this will take care of it all. And of
It's
course, it's always prone to false positives, and there's
it's
no way to exempt it. So it's just on for the whole server or off for the whole server. And I usually wind up with it off because it annoys the crap out of me.
it kind of sounds like it's like saying you can't have any log4j jars anywhere on your hard drive. So
Exactly. It wasn't a terrible idea. I mean, people have done stuff like this in their own. I mean, remember when all the SQL injection things were going on around 2008? Actually, were you in Cold Fusion in 2008?
I was not even programming in 2008.
When I first started blogging, and there was a huge like surge in SQL injection attacks in general, but especially on Cold Fusion. And everybody was putting this chunks of code in their application.cfc that would loop over all the URL variables and would try to search for a bunch of kind of heuristics based checks again of strings that looked like it might be an exploit. And then the hackers would get smart and they'd like hex encode it and all this stupid stuff. And at the end of the day, it was all, instead of going through and parameterizing all your queries, slap this thing at the top of your app and it might blow up half the pages because it gets false positives, but at least you don't get hacked. I think there could be value in a stopgap thing. Like, we're in the process of fixing our query params, in the process of fixing our encode for HTMLs. I've never liked leaving stuff like that on. But again, do you go with the safer option that might have some false positives? I wish there was a way to turn it off somehow on a page. And like flag, like this is a page in a CMS that I expect to have HTML submitted and I trust where it's coming from, leave it alone. And then the rest of my app, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
The home page of my app will not have HTML script tags ever submitted to it. Scan all you want, but it was like I said, it was always on or always off, and so I always wound up with it always off, even though there was just a couple pages in the entire CMS where it mattered. But
Yeah, I think that would be nice if it was. You could opt out of it per page. The other things here in the article that I would suggest anybody look into was talking about the encode methods, right? Encode for HTML and HTML attribute. Talked about OWASP and anti-SAMI, which is a way to, I think Ben has a blog post about it, say these are the allowed tags and the allowed attributes in this content. Great for things like Markdown. Content security policies, which is great in more modern browsers, that you can say these are the allowed scripts that can run from these URLs, or even, as Ben has shown before, with a nonce, I think that's how you pronounce it. Basically a token that is on all of the ones the server generated, and if it doesn't match what the server said it was, then it will not run. So there's a lot of security tips there that you should know even if you have script protect on, because as he said, this only works on data that comes in through URL, form, headers, things like that. But it doesn't help you if it already is in your application somewhere in your database, gets in some
Right.
other way. So
Yeah, and it's also worth mentioning that the regular expression used for script protect is very basic, and it probably doesn't even catch like half the stuff that's on the like these SAPI libraries will catch. So it's definitely a band-aid.
all right. Okay, filling out our Ben corner was the return of the Ask Ben series. So people asking him a question and him answering on his blog. And this was about converting an XML document into a nested Cold Fusion struct. Spoiler alert, the answer is recursion. Whenever you...
Yay! This is a fairly common one that comes up over the years.
Yeah.
People want to take XML and turn it into a bit more, native-y data types. There's not always like a single answer because everybody's XML is built a little differently. Are the properties all nested tags? Are the attributes within a tag? So I've seen a handful of kind of pre-built libraries like this, but they all do the same basic thing, which is what Ben's doing here at Recursion, which is pretty nice.
Yeah. So take a look. I think the other thing to point out is there is 3 bullet points where there are some assertions or assumptions about the data that might match your XML, that might not, but you need those assumptions in order to build the rest of it. So yeah,
Right.
It was fun. I'm excited to see what other Ask Bens get submitted.
Yeah, really not a ton of code, but that's the beauty of recursion. I like that.
All right, let's talk about finding a job. On getcfmljobs.com, there are 32 Cold Fusion positions. 3 new jobs this week. One that seems to have come up every week right now is a Cold Fusion software developer at Overland Park, Kansas.
That's my neighborhood. I bet I know who that is.
So I'm not sure if these are 3 different jobs that are coming up, or they keep reposting the same job, trying to keep it at the top.
Ulig LLC, yeah. I applied there once.
Now's your chance. I'm just kidding. Don't leave us, Brad. A database and Cold Fusion developer in Hobart. I think this one's in Australia.
Hobart, like the welder? Like
Hobart
welder?
TAS, Australia. And finally, a Cold Fusion developer at Halifax, Ontario, Canada.
There you go.
You can always check out the full list at CFMLjobs.com.
So what's this module of the week here? ForgeBox module of the week.
The ForgeBox module of the week this week is TOTP, which stands for Time-Based One-Time Passwords. This is, if any of you have used Google Authenticator, Authy, it's built into some password managers now, like 1Password. This is I'm going to sign up for 2-factor authentication, I scan a QR code, and now my phone generates codes every 30 seconds.
So can you use the actual like Google Authenticator app or something with this?
Yeah. So this handles all the stages of that. You can create a secret, the authenticator URL, and even a QR code for it, scan it with Google Authenticator, and it will start generating codes. You can then validate those codes with the given secret to make sure that they match for that user. You can also generate the tokens if you need straight from this library, so it can handle all of the things that you need there.
Interesting. So does this use like a third-party web service then?
No. So no. The one-time passwords, the time-based, they're all it's all math. It's all HMAC stuff. So hashes. The time-based ones it uses the current time as the counter in buckets. Like that's what the 30 seconds is for.
Okay.
So given the secret, you can calculate every hash at any time, which is again why keep that secret. But yeah, it's just math.
So I mean, I use the Google Authenticator app, and I have like 5 or 6 different VPNs and sites and stuff. And I've never really known like where these came from. I always assumed that some like remote web service like pushed here's the current password. But you're saying that's not the case. The app with the knowledge of the secret and whatever else it goes with can just look at the current time and tell me what the current code is. That's what you're saying?
Correct. Yeah. Given
Oh,
the
wow.
secret and the current time, you can generate a code.
That's pretty nice. So how long before we had this in like ContentBox?
That's a good question. That was one of the reasons for building it. ContentBox already had two-factor authentication,
Exactly.
but the only one that was built in was Amazon SNS, so it would send you a text message with a code, which those are not like going on any sort of math pattern like this. It's just generated and then match what was generated.
And that's probably why I assumed it worked that way, because I was used to like the text or the email push, which obviously comes from some server. The text ones are annoying because I've been on like a flight using the in-flight Wi-Fi and I want to get on and do some work, but it's a VPN that only allows me to get a text password. I'm like, I can't get text messages at 40,000 feet. Come on, guys. But
that would not be a problem with this. If you want to just play around with it, you can actually clone the module, start your server, and the index page is actually a playground.
nice.
If I have it up, I might let you talk about something else. If I can find it, I can show it on the podcast here. But
was this sponsored by a client or just something that we did in
no, this was me scratching an itch. I wanted to work on something that wasn't like that had an end in sight. Like it was a deliverable. I could get it done. I've always been interested how it works. There was some interesting challenges, like the secrets are base 32 encoded, which is not built in to CommandBox. Luckily, actually, our friend Mr. Ben Nadal has a base 32 CFC, which I took and threw in here.
Can't you use the format in or whatever function?
That didn't do what I needed, so maybe. That was one nice thing about this being such a standard, is I could pull test cases from lots of places. The other fun things about this were learning about bitwise functions, and some limitations in some of our CF engines. They all assume your number is an integer when you do operations like bit and, which was not true here, so I had to figure out some fun workarounds in Java.
I'm not actually sure how a decimal would be represented in binary. Like when I think of, like all the bit and examples, I went through in college, you're always just looking at some integer represented, as like, an 8-bit, byte or something, and it's very simple. But if you have a decimal, what does that actually look like in binary?
I mean, it's a good question, and the numbers aren't decimals in the code, but that's what Cold Fusion, or at least Lucy under the hood, was treating everything as a double, and then casting it to int, and that was a problem when the number was big. So, so I have it here. Let me switch over to
big
the
numbers.
Screen.
Scott Steinbeck had mentioned in the chat earlier, another one of the fixes going in 5.3.9 Lucy is some improvements to really, really big numbers in JSON, where Lucy, once you get past like 12 digits, decimals, I think, would start like truncating and turning stuff into strings. But I think you might have worked with Misha on that too, but there's been some improvements to that, which I know trips a lot of people up.
Got it. So here's the index page for this module, and I can regenerate this secret, and you can see that's the base 32 secret. This is the thing not to share.
Wait, can I scan that with my Google Authenticator app?
You
right now?
absolutely can, and you will start getting codes. And so this is the URL that is in that QR
Example
code,
company,
right? And then you want to give me a token, right on there.
549984.
Validate. Token is valid, and if I change it to something else, invalid.
Nice.
And
Yeah, it shows up right here. Example company, and then in parentheses, there's example plus company.
Yep.
That's
and if
obviously
I
what you have.
regenerate the secret, obviously that token isn't valid. Most authenticators will let you go like plus or minus a period, which is usually 30 seconds. All of that's configurable in here as well. Most of this work was based off of, especially the QR code stuff that Alan Quinlan worked on here at Ortus. So I found his shadow library after I had published my first version, and his code helped me get to this point. So
That's really easy though, as far as like, because I assumed it would be like a real pain in the butt to like integrate something like this in, but like you basically just started the server, and I scanned the QR code, and I had codes, and you just put in the plumbing to check them.
yeah, so if you were coding this along in your app, you would generate the secret and the QR code. It's very recommended that you have the user give you a valid code before you save that secret, in case they didn't save it right.
Well, that's not a bad idea, yeah.
But
I've always wondered, is there any sort of like grace period where, because whenever I'm doing my codes and I see the timer and it's almost at 0 and I'm typing it as fast as I can, if by the time I hit submit it's like 2 seconds past, is there like a grace period that will allow like the previous code to still work for 10
yes,
seconds?
so most of them are based that you can enter one up to 30 seconds in the past and up to 30 seconds in the future.
Okay, to allow for some clock variation or
Right.
whatever.
So here's the code for this one, which is just one file here. This is not using ColdBox, but ColdBox makes the Java stuff a lot easier. So right here we're generating all of the config. This is the secret, the URL, and the QR code. Though you can generate one at a time. And here's it where we verify the code with that secret and the token they gave in. So just all in one file here. Here's that allowed time period discrepancy. So if you pump that up to like 100, you could go, whatever that is, like 300 seconds, and no, that's 3,000. I can't do math. 3,050 minutes, which is probably not what you want.
Yeah, that's just a little lax, but hey.
But by default, it does let you go one in the past. That was what I saw kind of as the consensus.
Nice. Yeah, because I totally hit the button just right as that little clock animation was expiring, and it always still worked, and I always wondered about that.
Yep.
And we've answered so many questions today. My life is all making sense now.
So yeah, now you can do all of that in ColdFusion. It's totp. If you install it in the CommandBox app, you can inject it and everything's ready to go.
To clarify, you said it does not require ColdBox?
Correct. If you do want to use this in a non-ColdBox setting, everything will work except for the barcode the QR code generation. For that, you need to either install I can't pronounce it. It's like CFZXING based on the Java one, and configure that, or bring your own barcode generator kind of thing. So, but everything else will still work if you're not in ColdBox. You can just generate the secret, generate the URL, all that. You just can't do barcodes.
Nice. And by barcode, do you mean QR code?
Yeah, it's all the same thing. So
I saw a cartoon this week of the two zebras talking, and one had the stripes, and the other zebra had a big QR code on the side. He said, "Come on, man, upgrade."
All right, so this next one is, it's technically our VS Code hint, tip, and trick of the week, but I'm hijacking it to do more of a full computer hint, tip, and trick of the week. Because this was bugging me today, where I was running into keyboard shortcut conflicts. I love using a clipboard manager, and I had it configured to Command-Shift-V, which is also sometimes the keyboard shortcut for paste without formatting. And so I was running into that and getting sick of it, and what else are you going to use? There's only so many fingers you can hold down keys with. And that brought up it reminded me of the idea of a hyper key. So there's not actually a hyper key on your keyboard, but the idea involves mapping some key to Shift, Control, Option, Command. Or if you're on Linux or Windows, that would be Shift, Control, Alt, Windows key. Like all four of those at once.
Just mash it. Okay.
So you map one key to that. I've mapped caps lock because I never use caps lock.
I know, right?
So now I can hit caps lock and any other key, and nobody's done that as a keyboard shortcut because it would be really annoying to hold those four modifier keys down. But now that it's mapped to one, I have this whole world of keyboard shortcuts open. So now my clipboard manager is, I hit caps lock and V, and it's up.
Nice.
So I have here in the show notes ways to do this in Mac, in Windows, and if you really want to get into it on Linux, that one's a little weirder. The Mac one uses an app called Better Touch Tool, and it's very straightforward. Windows, there's an auto hotkey version. I did see a registry hack too, if you're feeling adventurous. But if you two run into keyboard shortcut collisions often, the hyper key might make your life easier.
Do we need to have a little disclaimer on our podcast that's like, if you break your computer following any of our advice, it is not our fault.
I don't know. That's a good question.
But not our fault.
So, question: can you use Better Touch Tool if they don't have a touch bar? Yes, my laptop doesn't have a touch bar, and I use it. So, yeah, we'll put all these in the show notes, and I'll try to paste them all in the chat right now. But it has made my keyboard shortcuts much nicer.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I like that better. I remember when like SQL Server Management Studio like 2008 or so came out, and they introduced some really funky, they called them chords, where it was like 4 or 5 keys all at the same time to do some stuff, and I could never like remember them all. It was just worthless. They might as well have not wasted their time because it was too many characters for me to remember. So I like the sound of this.
All right, we put it there in the chat, and we'll have it in the show notes as well. Well, we have reached the end of today's episode.
Aww.
Thank you all for joining us, live people, and thank you for anybody listening in the future. And a special thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. Yay. These are individuals and companies that are supporting our open source initiatives, like all of your favorite box products and this podcast. You too can support us on patreon.com/ortussolutions. We have lovely perks for those who do, including access to a private forum on our community website, an awesome badge to show off your support, and those supporting at the bronze level or up get a ForgeBox Pro and CFCasts subscription as a perk for their Patreon support. Now, we would like to thank those who are our Patreon supporters, and we will let Brad stumble through all of those names for us.
Wait, what? Okay. John Wilson from Synaptrix, Eric Hoffman, Gary Knight, Mario Rodriguez, Giancarlo Gomez, David Belger from... Oh, that's just his last name. Bellinger. We have pronunciations written on the doc. Jonathan Parrott, Jeffrey McGee from Sunstar Media, Dean Maunder, Joseph Lamery, Don Bellamy, Jan Yannick, Laxma Turtohadi, Carl von Stetten, Dan Carr, Jeremy Adams, Jordan Clark, Matthew Clemente, Daniel Garcia, Scott Steinbeck from Agri Tracking Systems, Ben Nadell, Mingo Hagen, Brett DeLine, Kai Koenig, Charlie Earhart, Jonas Erickson, Jason Diger, Jeff McLean, Sean Oden, Matthew Darby. This list has gotten longer, hasn't it? I love it. Ross Phillips, Edgardo Cabezas, Patrick Flynn, Stephanie Monge, Kevin Wright, and Stephen Klotz. Our beautiful, beautiful list of Patreon supporters.
We hope to see your name there next week.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, and we will catch you next week.
Spotify or iTunes. We also have the link to YouTube to find more videos just like this. The music used in this podcast is under a royalty-free license from Sound.com and Blue Tree Audio.